All right, let's size up some possible playoff opponents, starting with the Cincinnati Bengals. Record 10-6, won 3 straight to clinch the AFC North. Head coach, guy named Zach Taylor, ever heard of him? First trip to the playoffs in 3 seasons. Already got Bert laughing. This is good for me. Quarterback, fellow by the name of Joe Burrow, famously went to LSU. He's second in the NFL with a 108.3 passer rating. Got a weapon on his hands. Talking about his college teammate, Jamar Chase, famously also went to LSU, fourth in the NFL with 1,429 receiving yards. Let's get into the deep dive. And you know what? We spoiled it with a little laughter from our friend Bert Breer. Tommy Curran is also here. Bert, off the top, I was saying, give me the Bengals. Give me the Bengals over the Bills, certainly over the Chiefs all day. But you're kind of into the Bengals.
Yeah, I am. I would still rather see the Bengals than the Bills or the Titans, to be honest with you, or the Chiefs, of course. I just think the Bengals have changed. And I don't think this is the Bengals of Andy Dalton and Marvin Lewis. And I think the reason why is Joe Burrow is a legitimate culture changer. And I think the confidence that team carries itself with now is completely different. And Tom's going to scoff when I say this. I think as far as young quarterbacks go, he's the closest thing we've seen to Tom Brady since Tom Brady himself. Just the way he plays stylistically, his aptitude for the game, the confidence he carries himself with, the way he rubs off on his teammates, and I think the way he wins. We saw it at LSU, changed the culture there, won a national title. They broke every record in the book. Offensively, that program could never get out of its own way before then. And lo and behold, he comes into the NFL, and in year 2, he's changed everything in Cincinnati.
I don't hate it. I do not. I love Joe Burrow, and I love him for the third reason you cited. Gets everyone behind him. He brings people with him. He's got one of those personalities that he can meld with anyone and not do so in an unauthentic way. I love Joe Burrow. I think he's outstanding, and I think that should be what people would hope that Mac Jones at least gets on the track of. If I look at the 2 best quarterbacks in the AFC right now, who aren't Patrick Mahomes, et cetera, I'd say Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow are going to be fascinating to watch over the next few years. All that said, Deej, I think it's a hard matchup that people might be whistling by the graveyard with, because Cincinnati can actually play defense. They're very good against the run. And the Patriots, if they can't establish that, that's a problem. Additionally, I think Cincinnati's a problem because they can go and run and hide on you. They can have a game where they put up 34, 38 points and have Joe Burrow throw for a pile of yards. We understand where the Patriots are offensively right now and with Mac Jones. And it's not going to be with a 31 for 37 game for 394 yards and 4 touchdowns. It's going to be 10-2, right, Deej?
And I agree with you that we are just looking at the uniform. I mean, I'm looking at the Bengals and saying it's the Bengals.
See those stripes and no way.
I'm saying, Bert, I am looking at them and I'm like, maybe they're the Bengals of Andy Dalton and who was the Marvin Lewis that you mentioned. Everybody's nuts about the intangibles with Joe Burrow. I will say that I'm more of a Justin Herbert guy than a Burrow guy. Mm-hmm. But if everyone's crazy about the intangibles with him, and we've all seen him smoke the cigar and we've seen him win and everything like that, do we then take him out of the category of somebody who can be exploited as a young quarterback the way that Bill Belichick does with so many young quarterbacks?
I think it's going to be harder to, and one, because of him and because of his aptitude for the game. Again, I think this is a guy who, because he's not overwhelming physically the same way a Josh Allen or Justin Herbert is, he's had to learn to play the game a different way, and he's had to evolve faster mentally than other players. I think the same, again, like I hate to keep making these Brady parallels, but I think that's one reason why Brady became what he became, because he had to become that, and Joe Burrow has had to become that. So I think mentally he's a little bit more difficult to beat than some other quarterbacks that are his age. And then the second piece of it, they're diverse offensively. And I think that's the one thing, when you look at the Patriots defense, teams that are able to get them, they're able to hit you from different angles, right? So we all focus on what Jamar Chase has done, and rightfully so. Jamar Chase is already one of the top 10 receivers in the league, but they've also got T. Higgins. They've also got Tyler Boyd. They've also got Joe Mixon behind him. And so that's another reason why I think it's a little bit of a more difficult matchup for the Patriots defense, because if you take one thing away, they've still got a couple other things they can throw at you.
You have to anticipate, too, that they are going to take that away. If it's the Kansas City Chiefs, we've seen Travis Kelce negated. We've seen in times Tyreek Hill negated for stretches of time. The Bengals aren't the 2018 or 2019 Chiefs. So somebody will be taken away. They will be, swimming upstream at some point, whether it's Jamar Chase or T. Higgins or whoever. Joe Mixon is then an antidote, but that to me will be the part of it that makes a big difference. It's not Mac Jones against Cincinnati and Zach Taylor. It's not necessarily, it's Bill Belichick against that number one guy, and how do they veer off of that guy being taken away, Deej.
Yes or no, real quick on both of you. If the Patriots were to lose in the first round against the Bengals, would you be disappointed?
Yeah.
I say no. I say no.
No, I'd be disappointed in that it's a game you could win. I wouldn't say that the season was a failure. Am I splitting hairs? I'm kind of splitting.
No, that's close enough.
I think if they play Cincinnati in Cincinnati, it's a toss-up game, and I'm not disappointed in the year because I really think that you were trying to set yourself up to be rolling going into year 2 with Mac Jones, right? Because that's when you really start to take advantage of having a quarterback on a rookie contract. It's when the Chiefs hit their stride with Patrick Mahomes, Eagles with Carson Wentz, Rams with Jared Goff. And so I think the whole goal for the season was try and make it back to the playoffs to validate what you've done in rebuilding the team over the course of the offseason and then set yourself up for 2022. And I think both those things have already been accomplished.
All right, let's turn our attention to the Buffalo Bills, 10-6 record. Head coach, a guy who hates Bill Belichick, named Sean McDermott. 4th playoff trip in 5 seasons, 2-3 record. Josh Allen, we've heard of him. Weapon, defense, but they also got them on offense. Don't you sleep on Stephon Diggs. Trenni now comes in, and Bert, round 3 against the Bills. I still say that round 1 doesn't really count. Round 3 against the Bills, I mean, they're the better team than you. You would expect the Bills would win that game, yes?
I would, yeah. I mean, the one thing that gives me pause about Buffalo, and I think they've grown a lot over the course of the last month, I think that loss to the Patriots was actually good for them in a way, in that they had to deal with being sort of the king of the mountain, right? They've been climbing for 4 years under Sean McDermott. I think this is the first time that they had to deal with somebody else coming for them and getting them in this sort of game. And so I think there's been a lot of growth there the last month. The one thing that concerns me about Buffalo, that weather on Sunday against the Falcons in the first half of that game. Now, they gathered themselves after halftime, seemed to get to them a little bit. They made a couple of mistakes. And you wonder, like, Trenni, again, this is a team that, of course, plays in those sorts of conditions. But we said it when the Patriots went there on that Monday night. They're not really built for those sorts of conditions. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. If this winds up being, say, Patriots-Bills on that Monday night on Wild Card Weekend, and the wind chill is 5 below in Buffalo, does that actually play more into the Patriots' hands than it would into Buffalo's hands?
Yeah, I guess that's why I'm not, jumping for joy at the thought of having to play the Buffalo Bills, because you're sort of hoping that Mother Nature cooperates, right? It's going to be 50 degrees here tomorrow. And I know Boston is in Buffalo, but it's not like we haven't seen extremes in other directions where you might not get lucky. It might not be 5 degrees at kickoff and it feels like 15 below. It might not be snowing. It might be 42 and mild. And if that's the case, then you're putting, I think, your eggs in the we are going to get lucky with the weather basket. With that said, if that does happen, like you said, Bert, the Bills are not built to, for whatever reason, I don't understand how you have a team in Buffalo and you don't build them to win in cold weather. Sure, they showed they could run the ball last week against the Falcons, but they still really needed Josh Allen's legs to sort of supplement that run game. And I'm not sure that you want to put a game in Josh Allen's hands in poor conditions, but I also don't like the idea that you're just hoping for poor conditions.
Bert, say the weather is fine and you go into that Buffalo game and it's not what it was when you played on Monday night. How are the Patriots game planning offensively for the Bills? Because when all things were equal, Mac Jones was bad against the Bills, and you learned that just running the ball against them doesn't work if they have Josh Allen able to answer back.
Well, I mean, I think the issue against Buffalo was, that they weren't able to manage Mac Jones the same way they did for most of the year. It's the same issue there was against Indianapolis. They weren't in 3rd and 2 anymore. They weren't playing from ahead the whole game. And when you're playing from a deficit and you're playing from long yardage, it's a totally different deal for the quarterback. And so, to me, like the key for the Patriots against the Bills would be offensively to control the pace of the game, have long possessions, and keep Mac Jones out of long yardage so they can't be creative against your quarterback. And so I think it's pretty simple, like that you're using your offense to highlight your quarterback by using your offense to protect your quarterback and keep the other offense off the field. I mean, it's interesting because it's the Buffalo Bills, and you have Bill Belichick here, and the Super Bowl. The game plan is actually sort of that Super Bowl 25 game plan, right, where they let Thurman Thomas run for 1,000,000 yards on them because it shortened the game.
But Bert, my follow-up question to you would be: can the Patriots do that against the Bills defense? Like, can they control the clock enough and take the ball out of Mac Jones's hand, put it in the hands of, say, Damian Harris and Ramondre Stevenson and Brandon Bolden and that crew? Because it certainly doesn't seem like they were able to do that when everything was equal and you took, the wind and the inclement weather out of their hands.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just about dictating the game being played on your terms. And again, like that game in Foxborough wasn't played on the Patriots' terms. That felt like a 3 or a 4 possession game. Like it didn't feel like the Patriots were particularly close. And again, because they were able to load up against your run game, because you're not controlling the pace of the game, it's just the whole thing was played on different terms. And if you're playing from behind, again, you've got less of an opportunity to sort of stick with the run game. That game in Buffalo was played in a phone booth. You know what I mean? Like that was like it never, the context of the game never really changed. And so, I mean, to me, it's about the style of play that you want the entire game to be played under, and limiting possessions that the Buffalo offense can have, not playing from behind quite as much. If you wind up in a spot where the Bills only need to get 2 or 3 stops, and now all of a sudden they're up by 2 touchdowns, well, then we're talking about something else. So it comes down to how your defense plays, too. You need to get a stop or 2, which they weren't able to do as effectively against Buffalo.
All right, what about
DJ, I guess that's what concerns me, is that the Patriots weren't able to do that offensively or defensively against both the Colts and the Bills. And to have 2 good teams that were fighting for something 2 weeks in a row and not be able to dictate the terms the way you were able to against, quite frankly, lesser teams earlier in the year, and then against Jacksonville. I haven't, I suppose we did see it against Tennessee, but they were decimated as well. That's what would concern me about facing a team like Buffalo, is that you weren't able to do it before. I'm not sure you'd be able to do it in the postseason.
Oh, no, the Colts and Bills games, those were total flukes. The Jacksonville game was the one that I take seriously and read into. What about the Chiefs? Record 11-5. Stupid Chargers, that Thursday night game, won their 6th straight AFC West title. Head coach, a guy named Andy Reid. Nice fella, 7-6 in the playoffs. Kansas City, 1-1 in the Super Bowl. We know what happened last year. Quarterback Mahomes, 6-2 in 3 trips to the playoffs. Super Bowl, what was that, 54? MVP?
Yep.
They got Tyreek Hill. They got Travis Kelce. We know all about the Chiefs. Let's bring back Curran. And Curran, my question to you is, have we left the realm of the previous conversation when we're talking about the Bengals and then we're talking about the Bills? And the Bills, I think, are nothing to sneeze at. But once you begin talking about the Chiefs, are we then jumping into a different stratosphere as far as potential opponents go?
Talent-wise, yes. And to a degree, experience-wise as well. But let's be really, really honest and blunt about this. The Chiefs are gaggers. They gagged in the Super Bowl. They gagged in the AFC Championship. Good thing that Jimmy Garoppolo overthrew whoever it was he overthrew. Albert, help me. Emmanuel Sanders?
It was Emmanuel.
I think it was Emmanuel Sanders.
That was also a gag from San Francisco that actually preserved the Chiefs. The Chiefs right now are that close to having not won a Super Bowl despite all the talent that they have. So, yes, they are wondrously talented. But defensively, they can be had. And you saw it last week with Cincinnati. It's kind of a must-win game. And, yeah, Cincinnati's good too, Albert. But I am never going to look at the Kansas City Chiefs and say, ooh, they're going to run you out of the stadium. Andy Reid, like you said, nice guy, DJ, but he does not put the fear of God in any other opposing coaching staff, despite his tenure.
Yeah, and if Dee Ford is on size, then the Patriots don't get to their last Super Bowl. I mean, which I guess is gagging, right? Like, so I guess
but you lost to a team that went 11. That team went 11-5 and didn't beat a single playoff team. Excuse me, lost to every single team. I'm talking about the Patriots in 2018. Every team they lost to in those 5 losses failed to make the playoffs. They weren't a real good team. They still beat you in your home field.
What's interesting is the Chiefs' offense has just hit its stride, and they played well enough against the Bengals to win. It wasn't their fault that they lost that game. And so I actually look at the Chiefs as, it could be a more complete team than they've had because their defense has carried them through most of the year. The question is whether or not you buy that 8-game stretch where the defense was absolutely dominant. And if they're getting their top-level performance out of guys like Chris Jones and Tyrann Mathieu and Frank Clark, that could wind up being a top 10 defense going into the playoffs, that type of defense going into the playoffs. And now we're talking about a little bit more complete of a team. And so they've gotten a little healthier over the course of the year. We'll see how much Edwards-Helaire adds to them offensively. But yeah, I mean, I think as far as like the high-end potential, like who has the highest ceiling of all the AFC teams is clearly the Chiefs. The question is whether or not they can summon the sort of defensive performance that they got for 2 months that's ended the last couple of weeks back in the postseason.
DJ, can he address the gaggers allegation with more than Dee Ford was offsides? Can we make him do that?
Yeah, go ahead, Bert.
I mean, they came back from 10 points?
So they're not gaggers.
They came came back in
Patriots,
the Super Bowl.
Famously, the Patriots gagged in that game.
Okay. So wait, Tom. They came back from 24 down against the Texans in that playoffs, right?
How do you get down 24 to the Texans?
They came back from like 14 down to the
Weren't
Titans.
the Patriots down 24 to the Texans like this season?
I think the Chiefs came back from
whole
double-digit
different
deficits in all three of those games, right? And won a Super Bowl. It's hard to call them chokers when they won a Super Bowl.
I don't know, man. They didn't show up last year in the Super Bowl. They got shredded.
That was weird. But that was the offensive line.
Weird. It's what they do.
The offensive line, but that was. I mean, they had five.
They got down
backup offensive
24-0
linemen
against
out there.
Houston. I mean,
they had me and you out there blocking for Patrick Mahomes.
Be that as it may.